Pain is not our enemy. It is our greatest teacher. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that through suffering, the soul is cleansed of illusion and pride. Every wound, every loss, every silent struggle strips away the false layers of the self, revealing what is pure and enduring within us. Pain, he said, purifies. It forces us to see life as it truly is, and through that vision, we awaken to wisdom and compassion. Schopenhauer's belief that suffering is the essence of life stems from his deep understanding of existence as inherently tied to pain. He viewed the world not as a harmonious place designed for happiness, but as a stage of ceaseless striving, where every desire leads inevitably to dissatisfaction. For him, life is a constant struggle of the will to live, an unconscious force that drives all beings to pursue survival, pleasure, and achievement. Yet this same will is also the source of all pain. As long as we continue to desire, we continue to suffer. In this sense, pain is not a mere interruption of happiness. It is the continuous undercurrent of existence itself. To Schopenhauer, pleasure is nothing more than the temporary absence of pain. When a desire is fulfilled, the momentary relief feels like joy, but soon after, a new desire takes its place, bringing with it another cycle of longing and frustration. This endless chain keeps the human soul in turmoil. The truth, therefore, is that life is fundamentally tragic, and those who recognize this reality begin to see suffering not as something to be avoided, but as a mirror reflecting the true nature of the world. Only by confronting pain can one see beyond the illusions that society and the senses create. Schopenhauer often drew parallels between his philosophy and the teachings of Buddhism and Hinduism, both of which view life as suffering, dukkha, and suggest that liberation comes through detachment. He believed that the essence of life lies in this shared experience of pain, which connects all beings. Every creature suffers in its own way, driven by the same blind will. A lion suffers from hunger and the struggle for dominance. A deer suffers from fear and vulnerability. Humans suffer from desire, ambition, and loss. Pain is the great equalizer, the invisible thread that binds all living things in a shared destiny. But there is a profound meaning hidden in this seemingly pessimistic view. Schopenhauer did not see suffering as pointless. On the contrary, he considered it the key to self-awareness. Through pain, a person is stripped of illusions, the illusion of control, permanence, and happiness through external means. Suffering forces the individual to turn inward, to reflect deeply, and to see life from a higher, more detached perspective. When someone faces hardship and still remains aware, they begin to rise above the blind will that governs most lives. In that moment, the soul starts to purify itself, gaining wisdom that cannot be found through comfort or pleasure. The essence of life as suffering also reveals something about compassion. Since all beings suffer, to recognize one's own pain is to recognize the pain of others. This awareness, born of shared suffering, is what gives rise to empathy and moral understanding. According to Schopenhauer, when we see another person or animal in distress and we feel compassion rather than indifference, it is because we subconsciously recognize ourselves in them. We see the same will, the same essence of life, mirrored in their struggle. Thus, pain becomes the root not only of wisdom but of morality. Schopenhauer's insight into suffering is not an invitation to despair, but a call to clarity. When one accepts that suffering is inescapable, one stops wasting energy fighting it, and instead learns to live with awareness and simplicity. The wise person, in his view, seeks peace not by chasing fleeting pleasures, but by reducing desires, quieting the will, and embracing solitude and contemplation. In this way, life's inevitable pain becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. It reveals truth, awakens compassion, and leads the soul toward purification. A state where one no longer resists the nature of existence, but understands it deeply. Pain, then, is not merely a burden to bear, but a doorway to enlightenment, the most honest expression of what it means to be alive. For Schopenhauer, pain was not merely something to endure, it was something transformative, a sacred fire through which the soul is purified. He believed that struggle and suffering play a necessary role in shaping human consciousness, The trials of life, rather than breaking us, have the power to strip away illusions and reveal what is genuine within. Every hardship, every disappointment, and every emotional wound serves as a refining process, burning away vanity, arrogance, and false hopes until only the essence of the soul remains. In this sense, suffering is a form of spiritual purification. It does not simply punish, it cleanses. It forces a person to confront the limits of desire, to detach from the endless pursuit of pleasure, and to seek something higher, inner peace and wisdom. Schopenhauer viewed human beings as slaves to their desires, constantly chasing satisfaction that never truly arrives. This restless striving is what he called the expression of the will, the blind and insatiable force that drives all existence. The more a person chases after pleasure, success, or recognition, the more they become entangled in the web of suffering. Pain, however, interrupts this cycle. It halts the feverish movement of the will and compels introspection. When one suffers deeply, the illusions of worldly joy begin to fade. The person realizes that happiness built on external conditions is fragile and fleeting. Through this realization, the soul begins to purify itself, to detach from the will's grip, and to seek truth beyond desire. The refining power of pain can be seen in the way suffering transforms character. People who have endured hardship often possess a depth of understanding and compassion that those untouched by pain rarely achieve. Schopenhauer saw this transformation as evidence of purification. A person who has suffered learns humility. They no longer look at life through the narrow lens of self-interest. They begin to perceive the shared human condition, the universal struggle that connects all beings. Pain erases the arrogance that comes with privilege and comfort, replacing it with empathy and wisdom. Thus, suffering, far from being meaningless, becomes the foundation of moral and spiritual growth. In the process of purification, the individual must confront inner chaos. Pain exposes the truth of one's nature, the hidden fears, weaknesses, and attachments that normally lie buried beneath distraction and pleasure. To face suffering with awareness is to confront one's own shadow. In that confrontation, a person learns endurance and acceptance. Rather than fighting against life's inevitable hardships, they begin to flow with them, finding strength not in avoidance but in understanding. This transformation marks the emergence of a purified soul, one that has faced despair and emerged wiser, calmer, and freer from illusion. Schopenhauer's view aligns with the ancient belief that wisdom is born through struggle. Just as fire purifies gold, pain purifies the soul by removing what is false. A life without struggle, in his eyes, remains shallow and untested. Comfort breeds ignorance, while hardship breeds insight. When one experiences loss, failure, or heartbreak, the mind becomes aware of impermanence, the reality that nothing in this world can be truly possessed. This awareness weakens the hold of desire and strengthens the connection with what is eternal and unchanging within. Pain, then, becomes a doorway to transcendence. Through this purification, life's meaning shifts from pursuit to perception. The purified soul no longer seeks constant satisfaction but seeks understanding. It learns to value silence, solitude, and contemplation, the states in which truth reveals itself. Suffering, once feared, becomes accepted as part of the human journey, a necessary passage towards self-knowledge. Schopenhauer believed that the noblest souls are those who have suffered most deeply, for they have seen life clearly. They no longer chase illusions of happiness but dwell in quiet awareness of reality. Pain has burned away the false, leaving only what is essential, the calm, luminous core of the purified spirit. Schopenhauer's concept of detachment from the will lies at the very center of his philosophy, and it is through this detachment that the soul finds true purification and peace. The will, as he described it, is the blind, irrational force that drives all living beings. It is the root of every desire, every impulse, every act of striving and wanting. From the smallest instinct to the grandest ambition, the will keeps us in a state of endless craving. This constant wanting is the cause of all human suffering because it ensures that we are never satisfied. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another arises, and thus life becomes a continuous cycle of longing and frustration. The only way to find inner freedom, Schopenhauer believed, is to detach oneself from this relentless will, to silence its demands and step beyond its control. This detachment is not about physical withdrawal from life, but rather a transformation of consciousness. The individual learns to observe desires instead of obeying them. Schopenhauer believed that through awareness, contemplation, and self-discipline, one can gradually loosen the grip of the will. Pain plays a crucial role in this process. When we suffer, we come face to face with the futility of desire. The things we chase so passionately, wealth, status, pleasure, even love, all prove to be impermanent and incapable of giving lasting peace. This realization does not make life bitter. It opens the door to liberation. Once the illusion of fulfillment through desire is broken, the soul begins to detach naturally. To detach from the will is to recognize that true happiness cannot come from satisfying desires, because the will itself is an endless source of unrest. Every fulfillment carries within it the seed of a new craving. Schopenhauer compared human life to a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. Pain when we desire and do not have, boredom when we have and no longer desire. The wise person, therefore, seeks to stop this motion altogether, not by denying life, but by transcending the will that drives it. Such a person becomes calm, self-contained, and less disturbed by external circumstances. They are no longer enslaved by the pursuit of pleasure or the fear of loss. Detachment from the will also brings a deeper understanding of existence itself. When one no longer views the world through the lens of personal desire, perception changes. The mind becomes still enough to see reality as it is, not as it is wished to be. In this state, one can experience what Schopenhauer called the aesthetic contemplation. Moments when, through art, nature, or profound thought, the self forgets its desires and simply witnesses. These moments are glimpses of freedom from the will, temporary escapes from the restless machinery of existence. Artists, philosophers, and mystics, in Schopenhauer's view, come closest to this state because they experience the world through perception rather than possession. However, the highest form of detachment is not temporary but complete, a state where one ceases to identify with the will altogether. This is a spiritual awakening that resembles the enlightenment described in Eastern traditions. The individual no longer fights against life but rises above it, realizing that peace is not found in changing the world, but in transforming one's relation to it. Desire loses its power, fear loses its meaning, and the mind rests in quiet understanding. For Schopenhauer, such detachment marks the soul's true purification. It is the victory of wisdom over impulse, of awareness over craving. The person who achieves this state lives serenely, unmoved by the chaos of the world. They see pleasure and pain as two sides of the same illusion and remain centered in the stillness of being. In freeing oneself from the will, one becomes truly free, no longer a slave to the endless cycle of wanting, but at peace with the essence of existence itself. Schopenhauer believed that compassion was the highest moral virtue, and he saw it as a natural outcome of understanding the universality of suffering. To him, pain was not only a personal experience but a shared truth that connects all beings. Every creature, whether human or animal, is driven by the same will and therefore endures the same struggle, to live, to survive, and to escape suffering. Once a person realizes this, the barriers of selfishness begin to fall. Through pain, one comes to see the common essence in others. The more deeply someone understands their own suffering, the more capable they become of feeling compassion for the suffering of others. Pain, therefore, becomes a bridge between souls, transforming isolation into empathy and selfishness into moral awareness. Schopenhauer's ethics were grounded in this realization. He rejected the idea that morality arises from abstract principles or religious commandments. Instead, he argued that genuine morality can only emerge from compassion, from the immediate emotional recognition that another being's pain is not separate from one's own. When we see someone in distress and feel moved to help, that impulse arises not from logic but from a deep, intuitive awareness that we are all manifestations of the same will. Suffering reveals this truth because it strips away illusions of difference and superiority. In moments of hardship, the pretense of individuality fades, and we glimpse the shared vulnerability of existence. Pain softens the heart. Those who have suffered are less quick to judge, more patient, and more understanding. Schopenhauer believed that compassion could not exist in a person untouched by pain, because without suffering, one remains blind to the inner reality of others. Comfort breeds indifference, while hardship breeds empathy. Through the experience of pain, the soul learns humility. It realizes that it is not above others, that pride and cruelty are forms of ignorance. This humility becomes the foundation of moral character. A person who feels compassion acts not out of obligation, but out of a spontaneous recognition of unity. This idea also transforms how we view the world. Once we understand that all beings are united by the same struggle against suffering, cruelty becomes unthinkable. Schopenhauer extended this compassion even to animals, whom he considered equal participants in the tragedy of existence. He was one of the earliest Western philosophers to argue for kindness toward animals on moral grounds, insisting that the pain of a creature is just as real as that of a human. To inflict suffering is to deepen the illusion of separation. To relieve it is to move closer to truth. Compassion, therefore, is not merely kindness. It is a form of wisdom, a moral awakening born from the direct understanding of life's essence. Schopenhauer saw compassion as the only force capable of countering the cruelty of the will. The will drives individuals to act selfishly, to pursue their own interests at the expense of others, and to perpetuate suffering in their pursuit of satisfaction. Compassion, however, breaks this chain. It represents a moment when the will turns against itself, when one's own desires are silenced in order to ease another's pain. This act of selflessness purifies the soul, for it frees the individual from the tyranny of ego. The compassionate person, in that moment, transcends the will and touches something divine. Ultimately, compassion transforms the meaning of existence. It gives moral and spiritual depth to a world otherwise defined by struggle and pain. Through compassion, suffering is no longer meaningless. It becomes the foundation of connection and understanding. Pain reveals the truth of life, and compassion transforms that truth into action. Schopenhauer believed that this realization leads to moral clarity, the awareness that all life deserves mercy and respect. In this way, pain does not only purify the individual soul, but becomes the source of humanity's greatest virtue, binding all beings together through the shared experience of existence. For Schopenhauer, acceptance was the beginning of transcendence. He believed that most human suffering is intensified by resistance, the refusal to face reality as it is. Life, by its very nature, is filled with pain, loss, and impermanence, yet people spend their entire existence trying to escape these truths. They seek distraction through pleasure, ambition, or material success, believing they can overcome the inherent suffering of life. But Schopenhauer taught that the only real path to peace lies not in escape, but in understanding. To accept pain is to accept the essence of existence, and through that acceptance, one rises above it. When the soul stops fighting against the inevitable, it begins to see life with clear eyes, and in that clarity, it finds serenity. This idea reflects Schopenhauer's belief that human suffering originates from desire. The will, the inner force that drives all living beings, compels us to strive endlessly, to chase after what we lack, and to flee from what we fear. This ceaseless striving creates tension and misery because it is never satisfied. Acceptance, then, is the act of stepping outside this restless movement. It is the moment when one says, "I will not resist what is." By doing so, one weakens the hold of the will. Pain still exists, but it loses its power to disturb. Acceptance does not mean passivity or resignation. Rather, it means a deep, conscious recognition that pain and imperfection are fundamental to the human condition. When one embraces suffering as part of life, transformation begins. The person no longer sees pain as an enemy, but as a teacher. Through acceptance, the soul learns endurance, patience, and perspective. What once seemed unbearable becomes meaningful, because it reveals truth. Schopenhauer believed that this shift in awareness marks the first step toward wisdom. Those who accept life as it is no longer demand that the world conform to their desires. They see the limits of control and find peace within those limits. This attitude does not numb emotion, it refines it. The individual learns to feel deeply without being destroyed by feeling, to face tragedy without bitterness, and to experience loss without losing the sense of self. Transcendence through acceptance is also an act of liberation. When a person stops fighting the natural rhythm of life, the energy once wasted on resistance becomes inner strength. Acceptance allows one to live with detachment, not indifference, but freedom from unnecessary suffering. In this state, the world is still imperfect, but it no longer feels hostile. The mind grows calm because it no longer expects constant satisfaction. This peace, Schopenhauer thought, was not the absence of pain, but the understanding of pain. To accept suffering is to see it as a universal law that touches all beings. And when one sees this clearly, compassion naturally follows, because one recognizes that everyone endures the same fate. Schopenhauer's idea of transcendence is deeply tied to the quiet dignity of endurance. He admired those who bear life's burdens with calm acceptance, without resentment or complaint. For him, such a person had reached a higher level of consciousness, one no longer enslaved by the blind impulses of the will. This state is not achieved through external success, but through inner stillness. The person who accepts pain does not lose sensitivity, but gains strength. They understand that joy and sorrow are inseparable, and that to reject one is to reject life itself. In the end, transcendence through acceptance is the purification of perspective. It turns pain into insight, limitation into wisdom, and struggle into peace. Schopenhauer's message was not to escape the world, but to see it without illusion. The one who accepts life as it is, with all its imperfection, beauty, and suffering, becomes free from the tyranny of desire and fear. Through that freedom, the soul transcends pain, not by avoiding it, but by embracing it as the truth that reveals the depth of existence itself. For Schopenhauer, the purpose of human suffering was not merely to endure it, but to reach a state of inner liberation through it. He believed that true freedom does not come from external achievements or pleasures, but from the conquest of one's own desires. The constant struggle to satisfy the will, the blind force that drives all beings, traps individuals in a cycle of longing, satisfaction, and renewed craving. This endless repetition keeps the soul restless and enslaved. Liberation begins when a person recognizes the futility of this cycle and learns to detach from it. Pain plays an essential role in this awakening. It exposes the emptiness of worldly pursuits and forces the individual to look inward, toward a peace that cannot be taken away by circumstance or time. Inner liberation for Schopenhauer is not a gift of fortune or intellect. It is the fruit of awareness. When one deeply understands the nature of life, that it is impermanent, uncertain, and filled with suffering, the illusions that once held power begin to dissolve. The individual no longer expects the world to provide lasting happiness. Instead, they seek a deeper form of contentment, born from detachment. This liberation does not mean the absence of emotion, but the absence of enslavement to emotion. A liberated soul still feels sorrow, joy, and pain, but does not cling to any of them. It watches life unfold like a silent witness, knowing that all experiences are transient and that peace lies beyond them. Schopenhauer described this state as a kind of inner silence, where the will's commands lose their authority. The constant voice of desire quiets and the mind rests in stillness. In that stillness, one experiences freedom not from life, but within life. External conditions may remain the same: hardship, loss, uncertainty, yet they no longer disturb the inner balance. This is the paradox of liberation. It does not remove suffering, but transforms one's relationship with it. Pain, instead of being resisted, becomes accepted as part of the cosmic order. The individual no longer fights against what cannot be changed. They align with it, finding peace in understanding rather than resistance. This inner liberation also brings a profound moral awakening. Once a person transcends the tyranny of their own desires, they naturally become more compassionate. They see themselves reflected in the suffering of others and feel moved not by selfish motive but by genuine empathy. Schopenhauer believed that such compassion was the highest form of morality, the mark of a soul that has freed itself from ego. The liberated person no longer acts for personal gain or recognition, but from a quiet awareness of unity with all beings. Through this recognition, suffering becomes not a curse but a teacher, guiding the soul toward wisdom and humility. The path to liberation, however, requires patience and courage. It demands that one confront pain instead of escaping it. The modern instinct is to distract oneself from suffering, to seek pleasure as an antidote. But Schopenhauer warned that this only strengthens the will. True freedom arises when one faces the pain directly, sees through its illusions, and accepts it as the essence of existence. When the mind no longer demands that life be different from what it is, serenity naturally follows. This serenity is not passive. It is the active expression of understanding. Ultimately, Schopenhauer's vision of inner liberation is one of transcendence through wisdom. The individual who has seen the truth of suffering no longer seeks happiness in fleeting forms but rests in the depth of being itself. They live quietly, free from the chains of desire, untouched by the rise and fall of fortune. Their peace is not given by the world and therefore cannot be taken by it. Through pain, reflection, and acceptance, the soul discovers its freedom. not beyond life, but within it, a still, luminous awareness that remains unshaken amid all the storms of existence. In the end, Schopenhauer's vision reminds us that pain is not the enemy of the soul, but its purifier. Through suffering, we come to understand the truth of life, that desire breeds restlessness, that acceptance brings peace, and that compassion grows from the recognition of shared struggle. Every hardship we face becomes an invitation to awaken, to shed illusion, and to rise above the tyranny of the will. The soul that endures with awareness does not remain trapped in bitterness. It emerges transformed, wiser, and freer. True strength in Schopenhauer's philosophy is not found in escaping pain, but in embracing it as the fire that refines the spirit. When we no longer resist the nature of existence, when we see beauty even in suffering, we discover a deeper kind of freedom, the serene liberation of a soul that has learned to see life as it truly is,